The AP poll streaks. All right, so we have some AP poll streaks. These were put out by On3 recently, and Alabama just completely obliterating everybody with 261. These are current AP poll streaks. That's 261 weeks in a row. Georgia, 114. Ohio State is the first Big Ten team at 62, and then Michigan at 46. Penn State and Oregon tied at 30. LSU 24, and then Notre Dame, Florida State, and Washington tied at 22. So thinking about this and what this meant for the Big Ten, that was what Zach and I were going to be discussing and trying to figure out. What does this mean for the Big Ten? Does this mean the Big Ten is a better conference than the SEC, considering you have two more teams with higher current AP poll appearance streaks right now? Or does that mean maybe the competition in the SEC is so tough that you can only get three SEC streaks going? I think it's a little bit of both. I do think the AP poll caters more toward the SEC teams a lot. So, you see Ole Miss getting up there higher than maybe they normally should, in my opinion. People are talking about Ole Miss as being this, big playoff team this year. I'm not saying they can't be, but I think sometimes teams like Ole Miss get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt just because they're in the SEC. And you say, oh, well, they have the SEC schedule. They have this stuff going on. I think the Big Ten schedule has a lot of difficulties in it as well. And I'm with you, Blue Wolverine. The Big Ten has caught up to the SEC a lot. I'm somebody who would fully agree with people. The SEC was better 2-3 years ago. Beyond that, but now with the Big Ten having Oregon, Washington, USC, I mean, we just had a national championship game last year that featured the Big Ten champions and the Pac-12 champions who are now in the Big Ten. So, yeah, of course they weren't in the Big Ten together last year, but still, that is a huge piece to the Big Ten showing that they are now to be trifled with as one of, if not the best conferences in all of college football. You still have your detractors out there who like to say, oh, well, Ohio State lost to Missouri, or, Penn State lost to Ole Miss. There's, I don't think you can use bowl games accurately for that kind of stuff. And I'm not just saying that for Ohio State. I'm saying that, and I've been consistent in saying that when we look at players and what they can do. Every single time people bring up Miller Moss and his 6 touchdowns against Louisville, I was like, okay, but that was also a bowl game. I think it's huge for him that he was able to get 6 touchdown passes in one game, and I think that shows what his ceiling can be. But it's also a bowl game where Louisville was kind of a fraudulent team, and you also had Louisville who didn't have some of their players that had been playing all season long. Now, I don't think they were quite as decimated as other teams like Florida State, right? Florida State. But then that's another game that the SEC tries to use and say, oh, well, we killed the ACC champion. They were 14-0 and 60 to whatever that score was. And it's just like, no, you're lacking context here. And that is one of the most important things when you look at college football. Is the context of all of these things happening. And in these bowl game situations where you have SEC teams facing Big Ten teams, if it's not a playoff game, it really doesn't matter all that much, because quite frankly, it doesn't matter to the players and the coaches quite nearly as much. Ask the coaches who take other jobs before the bowl game starts. These guys don't take jobs while the season is still going on because the season matters to them. These guys don't sit out games while the season is still going on because the season matters to them. But when you get into bowl season, the games are so late, they're not making any money off of them or anything like that. And so it's just something these players don't care as much about. And if you're the ultimate competitor, you're like, well, every game that you care about, every game should count. I would love for the world to be that way as well. Unfortunately, it's not. And that is one of the bigger issues you have with college football, is how some of these games go and how long they go sometimes. So we have Sonny here as well. He says, JR finally realized that he is a star and doesn't need any doofus co-hosts. I'm kidding. I appreciate you, Zach and Kent. Yeah, Zach was really trying hard tonight to get on the show. I was feeling for him. We've all had internet issues before, and his just hit him right before we came on the show. He was streaming another show right before, and yeah, hard time for him there. But it's all good. So I do think that there is a conversation to be had here about the Big Ten being top heavy, though, right? I mean, you have the three teams that have kind of been known as the big three in the Big Ten for the past few years. You have Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan, obviously, they weren't ranked in 2020. I think they've been ranked every week since. Ohio State, I can't even remember when they wouldn't have been ranked that would have stopped their streak. I know I'm probably just forgetting something out there. Maybe it was a week in 2020 when they weren't playing or something like that. I have no idea. That's probably what it was. There was probably a week in 2020 when Ohio State wasn't playing and they weren't ranked. And that was, Dabo's whole thing was, Ohio State's not ranked as high because they haven't played as many games. Well, you do start getting ranked once you play games. I don't remember that. If somebody remembers that, normally I'd look it up, but I'm a co-host tonight. But that's probably something in that situation there. Penn State, it must have been 2021 when they weren't ranked, something to do with Oregon there as well. This is kind of on par for Washington, and we've talked about Washington a few times and how they go on these spurts, they go on these runs where they're really, really good, and then maybe they hire the wrong coach, or maybe they have a bad recruiting class or something like that. Brian Myers in the chat says, "Go Bucks." Thank you for being here, Brian. Appreciate you. Like I said at the top, I don't have a co-host tonight, so I'm going to be relying on the comments quite a bit. So if you guys have your thoughts, throw them in there. But yeah, Washington, they kind of go on these spurts, and so Washington, people don't often see them as a powerhouse team, but I mean, they have better history than Oregon does. Oregon is, seen as like the better program right now because they have Dan Lanning and Kalen DeBoer just left Washington. But Washington, when they have the right pieces and things are humming, they're a very, very good program, and they're one that you can't mess with at certain times. So it's interesting to see if Washington can kind of keep that consistency. That's been their problem is they've had really good coaches, but then coaches leave, coaches go elsewhere, do other things, and so it's really interesting to see how that works and how a team that only has been ranked 22 weeks in a row got to the national championship last year. Same thing with Florida State. They just didn't get to the national championship. In fact, they didn't even get to the playoffs. They probably should have, but they didn't get to the playoffs. So, but I mean that number by Alabama, 261. That's destroying everybody else. Quite frankly, I mean that is more than doubled what second place Georgia is. And I think at a certain point, like if you're going to look at this and you're going to say, oh, the Big Ten is top heavy, guys, I've been saying this about the SEC for years. The SEC is just a top-heavy conference, right? I mean, I think sometimes the bottom of the SEC can be better than the Big Ten, but nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about, oh, which conference is better and who's better, Mississippi State or Northwestern. Like, it's just not what people. It's not what people debate. It's not what people talk about. People talk about the top of the conference, and for X amount of years now, it's been Alabama who's been at the very top of everybody else. And the SEC has rode the coattails of Nick Saban with his consistency to say, oh, we're the best conference because we have the best team out there. Quite frankly, yes, Nick Saban is one of, if not the greatest college football coaches of all time. But now that you don't have Nick Saban, you have Kalen DeBoer instead. Is Kalen DeBoer really going to be able to take over what Nick Saban did and not have a drought, not have a slouch? I mean, Nick Saban, he came to Alabama and he put that team on the map. They were not on the map before that. I mean, they were still a good program, but they were not the elite powerhouse that they were or that they are today now when Nick Saban found them. So, and that's one of the reasons why I've always argued that Alabama is not an elite program. They've had droughts. They've had coaches come in and they had to fire coaches earlier. And so, yes, Nick Saban built an elite program. You can say that. But when it's all built by one coach, is it really an elite program? Or was that just an elite coach? You look at a team like LSU. LSU, granted, they're only 24, AP poll streak in right now on this list, but LSU has won a national championship with their past three head coaches: Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Orgeron. Two of those coaches stink. Two of those coaches are not very good. But of course, you have a program at LSU that can put together amazing teams, amazing recruiting classes, and then boom, here you go. You have a national championship contender, and they've managed to win it by getting the right teams together. So We have a comment here from Blue Wolverine that said Saban left and it appeared Alabama was going to drop off completely with the transfer portal opening up. However, it appears as now it's only a small setback. I'm interested what will happen with Kalen DeBoer because I agree, Blue Wolverine. Like they didn't lose as many players as I thought they might. They didn't lose. I never thought they'd lose Jalen Milroe because of Kalen DeBoer, but I heard rumblings about Keon Keeley. I heard rumblings about some of the defensive backs there. I mean, a lot of defensive backs chose Alabama because of Nick Saban. And when you really think about that program and why players were going there, it wasn't because it was just Alabama. Sure, that was a part of it, right? But a lot of it was because of Nick Saban. And so I thought there would be a lot of guys leave too. But obviously not as many left as maybe we originally thought. And so it's going to be interesting to see if Kalen DeBoer can put together a really good defense that Alabama has been known for. Alabama does not like they don't or not Alabama. Kalen DeBoer does not put out defensive players in the NFL draft like Nick Saban did. I mean, nobody does it like Nick Saban did, but not even comparable. I mean, Kalen DeBoer has got quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive linemen, and part of that was Ryan Grubb into the NFL draft like crazy. But if I'm not mistaken, he's had one linebacker drafted in his entire time in FBS college football, which is like 5 years of coaching. He's had one linebacker drafted, one defensive end drafted. Check me on those numbers, but I'm almost positive that's a fact. He just doesn't put defensive players in the NFL. And if you're not putting defensive players in the NFL, I don't think you can have a dominant defense in college football. So Kalen DeBoer, he's going to have this offense humming. He's going to recruit well, right? I think because you have Alabama, you're going to recruit well. But it's going to be interesting to see what he can do. Brian Myers says that Ohio State streak should come with an asterisk. It was due to all the chaos from Tattoo-gate. Take 2011 out of the mix, and the Ohio State is number one on this list. Okay, so it was Tattoo-gate. I was wondering if maybe there was something there with 2020. I can't do the math on all the weeks in my head. It's either 2020 or Tattoo-gate, something in there. The math doesn't seem to be mathing here. When does 62 week streak begin? I should look that up really fast. 62 weeks before today. Let's see if Google. June 4th, Sunday, June 4th. No, that's not right. I don't know. Well, it's not 62 weeks from the day because they're only counting the weeks of the season. So, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I should have looked that up beforehand. I apologize, guys. But I was focusing more on like the SEC Big Ten battle there. So,